Hi, this is Caleb with A Safe Landing Counseling Services. This is a Christian perspective in counseling. I've got something to say about marriage today. Marriage is something that can be very difficult and rough for people as they find themselves, especially 3 children in, struggling to communicate, not necessarily seeing connection occur. So there's some things I want to kind of uncover with our society. Everybody knows about how social media affects them. If not personally, they've probably heard something that social media can actually be detrimental, especially within a marriage. So there's a quote, or I'm going to kind of reference Caroline Leaf here for a moment. She talks about deep change or deep thoughts change neural pathways in the brain. So when you think about something deeply more than just a passive thought, an example would be those pillows behind me. Well, they're yellow and we just move on. But if I look at them and I say they're yellow, they're plush, and they have pleats in them, and they have a lot of character to them, now I've just added a lot of thought behind that. That deep thought creates change within neural pathways and increases the density of a neural pathway. So when we have deep thought, we actually grow our brain considerably. If deep thought changes the brain, I would also encourage you to know that deep conversation with your spouse also increases connection. If you have deep conversations within your marriage that's intentional, that you are looking towards your marriage and saying, this is important, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to actually say, here's what I love about my marriage, or here's what's important about my marriage, this is where we're going, and this is the dreams that we have, and this is what delights my heart or opens my heart up or encourages me. Those kinds of thoughts will increase connectivity in the individual's brain, and then the connectivity between each other in the marriage, the spouse. So there are some things that come against that connection, and one of those would be social media. Yeah, oftentimes I hear spouses on this couch, right? I hear spouses say, I can't have a conversation. My spouse is always on their phone. Well, you never ask for me to get off my phone is the retort. The reality is that both of them are probably checking on their phones or disengaging, or one may feel resentment or bitterness that comes from seeing their spouse on the phone, seeing their spouse engaged on social media, and just scrolling through the next scene and being disengaged, and maybe even having the TV on while doing that. We find ourselves in social media that we're more engaged with other people's lives than our own, and so that prevents those connections from happening. So we want to be aware of how social media actually distracts from our marriages. Other things that we want to look at is the fear. There's a large amount of fear. Can I really talk to my spouse about this? Now, some marriages are in difficult situations where it may be hard to talk to your spouse about it, but that's rare. That's rare about most things. So things that come in the way of being able to talk about certain topics like sex or money and finances, or maybe it's being able to say, hey, social media is getting in the way. Any of those fears that come up are fear of conflict. And what we see in Scripture is an important approach is Jesus oftentimes had conflict for growth. Now, when you have deep conversation, oftentimes conflict arises. And that's okay, because what's happening there is you're working something out that's healthy. And don't be afraid of the conflict. Don't be afraid that the conflict might not be resolved tomorrow. It might not be resolved 3 weeks from now. You might need somebody else's help along the way, like friends or pastors or ministers or counselors, to help with the conflict. And that's okay. But don't be afraid of the conflict. The fear itself is paralyzing, and it keeps us from being able to grow. And so we need to be mindful of that. Other elements are bitterness and resentment. I don't want to talk to my spouse about that because I don't think they will treat me well. I don't think they will do this or that. And all of a sudden we create accusation. Accusation then continues to undercut the marriage, dissolving the foundations. So bitterness and resentment lead to this place of discontentment and accusation. What we can find is if we start thinking about what accusations are coming against our thoughts, against our marriage, against our spouse, if we backtrack them, really it comes back to a bitterness or resentment. And typically that's because we have not approached a conversation with our spouse about certain things. We have not dealt with things. We haven't entered into conflict that can help us grow. Oftentimes, conflict helps us grow. Pain is life pushing death out of the body, out of the marriage, out of a relationship. If a conversation is painful, it's probably because there's something dead there and it needs to be pushed out, cleaned up, put back in order so it can heal. I encourage you to take a look at your marriage, activate your heart, and say, I'm going to engage in conflict. I'm going to put down the phone. I'm going to make sure my phone goes off at a certain time. You can set an app for that. There's so many options. There's no excuses in your life right now that your phone has more than 2 hours of your day, even if you work with it. There's no excuse. I understand I work with my phone often, as you can see. There's no excuse for having your phone being the major portion of your connectivity and your spouse not. So in that regard, engage with your spouse. And if your spouse is not willing to engage right away, it's all right. Try again, because you didn't get into this situation overnight. It's time to turn around and say, I'm going to create changes in my own life that will affect my marriage. And you set your mind to do something for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and you'll see the change, and it should be lasting. Try that. See if you can get your spouse on board as well. And look for a revived marriage, one that's highly connective. And yes, you do have time. You have as much time as anybody else in the world. It's where you choose to put your time. If other things are taking up your time and your marriage is suffering, that's because you're not valuing your marriage properly. So I hope this helps somebody out there to look at their own life, not necessarily accuse their spouse. Look, you need to come listen to this guy. No, and look at your own life, start creating your own change that will then affect your spouse and that is always led by God. So I bless you to have a wonderful marriage, to have a new revived vision for it, and find a new routine that grows it with deep conversation.